As a kid, I was just tremendously fascinated with glass. Lamp working back then was very different than it is now, and the entire concept of lamp working has changed. I've been in lamp working now for 41 years, and so that kind of qualifies me as one of the old timers, I guess, old school maybe.
OG.
Yeah, and an old guard. I keep thinking people are going to bring me a walker one of these days. But no, anyway, back then, it was really interesting because the lamp workers were part of the old tradition, of making animals, making those sponge ships and boats and all that. And I was just really fascinated with that. So at like 9 years old, I saw this guy in the Gainesville Mall in Gainesville, Florida, and he was making the swans and all that kind of stuff. And so I really got interested in it. And back then, my dad, who was really hip, not back then, he was, all his life was hip, I think. But anyway, it wasn't hard to get him interested in it because he was into ceramics and stuff like that. So I kind of got him interested in it, and then I got a paper route. My folks loaned me some money to buy a torch when I was 9 or 10 years old, right? And so I got a paper route, and lo and behold, the paper that I was delivering for, the Gainesville Sun, wrote an article about me because, they heard about me, and they said, oh, well, we've got a paper carrier. And so I still have copies of the article, 40 years later. Roger Parramore, Kid on the Move. It was just hilarious, good stuff. But in that article, I so astutely noticed that glass blowing would always be a hobby for me. What I really wanted to do was be a tree trimmer for the power company. So, anyway, 41 years later, I'm still blowing glass, teaching at Pilchuck, teaching at Corning, Penland, all over the world, Australia, India, Japan. Glass has really taken me a long way. But, it really goes back to the very traditional roots of lamp working, and that is that back then, when I was a kid, these guys would come around to the malls, like Mother's Day, Christmas, anything like that. And I got to know them a little bit. I got to learn, what I needed, and kind of went from there. But on the flip side of that, there was, when the article came out in the newspaper, the scientific glass blower, Rudy Stroschein, University of Florida back then, got a hold of me and took me under his wing at the ripe old age of 12, and I worked with Rudy as a scientific glass blower, learning the scientific glass blowing. And I worked with him until I was 18 or 20, and then moved on to American Scientific Glass in Memphis, Tennessee. So Rudy took me under his wing and gave me a really old world style apprenticeship in scientific glass blowing. And so I literally grew up in the chemistry and physics department at the University of Florida, which at that time was just astounding. It could never happen again. The litigious nature of the world. You can't have a kid running around in, university glass shops. That's just not going to happen. But back then it did, and it was cool, and so that was part of it. But then another part of it, my folks had family down in Orlando, and if you grew up in Florida way back in the 70s or so, you realize what a tourist trap is. Well, there was this, in Claremont, Florida, there was this place called the Citrus Tower. And the Citrus Tower, in the basement of the bottom level of the Citrus Tower, lo and behold, was the Bouts Family Studios. And this was Gene Bouts and his son Donovan, and and they were basically a swan factory. They made the hollow swans that you fill water in and all that kind of stuff. But Gene was a fascinating character. He had been the carnival glass blower for the Barnum and Bailey Circus. And so he came directly from the old German tradition of the itinerant lamp worker that would follow around with the carnival of the circus. And when Barnum and Bailey wintered in Florida, he would, he bought a house there and everything, and ultimately retired and got built the studio up. But my folks got to the point where when we would go down to Orlando, they would just drop me off at the Bouts Family Studio, and Gene would, sit me up. And back then it was all German lead glass and soft glass and crossfires and stuff. And so as I was growing up, I really, was taken under the wing by two phenomenal glass blowers, but from extraordinary different traditions. So originally I got interested in making the little unicorns and stuff, the glass menagerie stuff. Then I got into scientific glass blowing and became a real whiz-bang at scientific glass blowing because Rudy didn't like to do any of the prototype stuff, and so he taught me how to do all of that. And so when the chemists and the grad students would come in, Rudy would just say, talk to the kid in the corner. So at the same time that was going on, I was visiting the Boutses down in Claremont and learning the crossfire, lead glass, old world style Christmas ornaments, and which to this day are still one of my super specialties, Christmas ornaments. So that's kind of where it all started for me. Back then, even when I was growing up, and I can remember in Gainesville, there was a head shop called the Subterranean Circus. And, I was 10, 12 years old going into the Subterranean Circus, looking at all these groovy, clear pipes that were coming out of these guys in California, whatever. I don't even know where they were come from, but it was way before your time, I'm sure. The first famous pipe was the Toker 2. And the Toker 2 was a 500 milliliter ball flask with a side arm that came off here and a rubber cork with a bowl that went on top and a carburetor. And that was like that was the pipe, But there was a lot of pipes, and this would have been in the early 70s, early 70s. And so this stuff was coming out from these groovy guys in California. And then Snotty, Bob Snodgrass, got in pretty close to that time. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it, and you got to give Snotty props. I mean, he really did take the pipe direction and really brought that, to the fore. But people tend to think that this whole pipe thing is the last 5 years or so. And it's like, you got to remember, this goes way back, okay? As far back as I can remember, and even further back than that, because I can remember. I mean, it's my memory, but I know that historically speaking, Gene Bouts made these Dutchman's pipes that were traditionally glass, and so those date from the 1800s and stuff. So you have to remember, scientific lampworking has been around since the late 1700s. First off, if you're asking a scientific glassblower when the first functional piece he made, you got to remember that scientific apparatus is functional.
Well,
okay, so so kind of break that line. Okay. But remember, I was building lasers and guidance systems and all sorts of vacuum systems, which were very, very, very functional. But again, I hope my mother never sees this, but I was making pipes by the time I was 10 years old, when I was in the 5th grade. So sixth grade, sorry. And by then I wasn't using these pipes, but buddies were, and they, I made a little extra money, and suddenly realized. So, even as far back as, 30 years ago, I was making it. Back then, you'd do a janky little piece, and you'd go to the hardware store and you'd buy a faucet screen and you put it down in there, and so the where things have gone now with the pipe scene, there's a pretty strong division about when that all started to explode and really blew up, and that's been fairly recently. But for me, way back in the 70s, I was making pipes, but they were never what I was interested in. I mean, they were things I would make for friends or something like that. Keep in mind that I'm still a very active glassblower, artistic glassblower. And let's back up just a little bit, because it'll help to bring it forward and sort of bridge some of this gap.
And I've honestly, to be with you, I've never met anybody who's been blowing glass this long.
Oh, I'm one of the old guys. Yeah.
This is like, I think I've maxed out.
It's important to get some perspective about a couple of things. One is that when I was working, so 1980-81 in scientific industry, I was hot, and a young kid with great hands, solid training, had come up, in the scientific world, completely old school, completely anything from the cutting edge all the way to making teddy bears. Okay, the full range. If it was glass and you did it at a torch, I had done it. Okay, by the time I was 20. So got kind of tired, went back to school. Got a degree in bachelor's in philosophy.
I was going to say, when did you go to school?
Well, I got my degree, my bachelor's degree in '87 in philosophy, and my master's in '89 in English literature. Now, during that time, when I was in college, what I started to realize was that I was coming in contact with the artistic side of lampworking that was developing in what we now really loosely call contemporary lampworking. So Bondu really did a good job of codifying the concept of contemporary lampworking, but long before Bondu came along and put a label on it, people were making a shift. There was a shift in perspective. Now the thing is that what you have to realize is that here were all these artists out there just stumbling and bumbling, trying to make anything they could. The only real resource was Hamishfar and Stong's creative glassblowing book. And then John Burton came along, and so there were a couple of these kind of funky old books that were out there. But what people don't really grasp or realize is that the formal body of technique for all of this stuff, I don't care what you're doing today, the formal body of technique came from the scientific side of things, because that's where all the real elaborate seals were being done, all the real elaborate annealing situations, all the real elaborate issues had been figured out. The problem is that most of the old guys that were scientific glassblowers came up, well, we're scientists, you know, and, oh, sorry, the microphone, that just made a big blip on your screen, I'm sure. But anyway, so they were really not interested in the artistic lamp workers. The artistic lamp workers were like a fly in the ointment to these old guys. And why do I say this? Because I used to be one of those, that part of that tradition. But what I realized, and what I came to realize, is that no one was really bringing the scientific traditions and the scientific techniques to the artists and making it accessible to the artists. The thing is that what I realized was that because no one was bridging that gap, I had an opportunity to do it. Okay, so we'll make a long story short. So yes, I started to reach out to the community, the art community, and what I realized back then, and this is a crucial point that people have really missed, and I'm going to probably for the first time say it on tape, but the concept of large-scale lampworking, blown forms, did not exist in the art world. It existed in the scientific world, but not in the lampworking world. So the hot workers of the day, and this was, keep in mind, this was about the time the studio glass movement was really starting to take off. So those guys would say, oh, you're a lamp worker, and this is classic. You say, oh, you're a lamp worker. That means you work very small. So one of the things that I realized is that, wait a minute, you know, lamp working is capable of some really large work. And so that became my gig. And so I started to reach out and say, wait a minute, we can make really large pieces and we can do really large things. You just have to develop your technical base. So anyway, you know, back about the early 80s, I started to really try to bridge that gap. And so what I realized in that time period that, you know, by bringing these techniques, and then shortly after that, contemporary lampworking was born. Now, I'm not saying I fathered contemporary lampworking or anything like that. There were a handful of people that were really, you know, making the inroads and had really turned the corner. And you can pretty much name them off pretty easily. The thing is that we were all sort of doing our own thing, but we were all doing our own thing at the same time. And so when all of that started to come together, then it was like, wow, whoa, look at this, look at what you're doing, look at what you're doing, you know. And then all of us started teaching. And so it's like, to this day, you can still pretty much trace lineages back to, you know, students, you know, that took my class back when, and took, you know, other people's classes and all this sort of stuff. And so this old guard, the old timers, we sit around and we look at a piece and we say, oh yeah, you took a class from me, and yeah, here's, you know, and that's me, and that's, you know, okay, oh yeah, they put it all together, and look at this, okay, whoa, you know, but it's something totally different, assembled from a lot of old guard stuff. Now, keep in mind, some of the stuff that's going on now is just crazy out there, and people have got mad skills, and they've got really mad visions, much more so than I do. My vision is still very traditional. It's still very based on symmetry and based on form and all of that kind of stuff. So along the line, you know, I was always the person who was ambivalent toward the pipe world. I like the pipe world. I like what's going on, and I've always tried to foster what's going on. You know, I've never been the naysayer, you know. But at the same time, my work just didn't really include that world. You know, I mean, I drifted in and out, and you know, talk with the guys at the conferences, or people come take classes from me, or they come take a class because they want to learn a certain type of seal or this kind of a thing. So for me, pipes were always something for family and friends that I did. So nowadays, we're coming up to what your real question was, and now it will make a little more sense from my perspective, is that the big argument that's going on now is the same argument that the early old guard went through with the hotshot people, and that is lampworking had no sense of self-dignity. It didn't have its own definition, okay? So a bunch of people came along and they gave contemporary lampworking a sense of dignity, a sense of definition. So this is exactly what's going on with the pipe guys 20 years later, 30 years later. They're going through the same thing. They want to be recognized as artists, which is a big deal, okay? So I've entered into this in one way or another. I've had different conversations in one way or another. I've influenced people one way or another about how to think about this. So finally, I have come up with my own way to try to, in essence, enter into that world, but at the same time help people understand what the struggle is all about and how to deal with that struggle. Okay, so this little piece that I have here, you know, is kind of a current answer to that question. And the idea is that people want to be recognized as artists. And lo and behold, I mean, come on, you know, you look at some of the stuff, of course it's out there. But the problem is that there's been this stigma attached to it's a bong, or it's a pipe, or it's whatever you want to call it, a stem. All these different names that come up for these things that are supposedly more or less politically correct, or this, that, or the other. It's like, you know, come on, they're pipes, all right? So the thing is that people say, oh, I'm an artist, you know, and these are pieces of art. The problem is they want to conflate functional art with art. Well, generally speaking, when you start talking art is generally sculpture. It's non-functional. As soon as you move into the functional realm, the argument tends to go toward craft, okay? What's the difference between art and craft? You don't get as much money for craft, okay? But now what we've come to realize with the pipe market is that there is this tremendously fast growing collector base, because this is a new art form and it is being recognized as an art form. So what this little piece here is, and I'm glad I'm going on record about this because this is brand new, okay, and I'm the guy doing it. So I'm like, okay, you know, there's no other way to say it. The thing is that if you're going to make a piece of art, one of the distinct things about a piece of art is that it's signed. So many people are not signing their work, or they're punching in some kind of a something. They're not taking ownership of the piece as this is a product of me. So what I've tried to do is to make a simple item. I sign them, I number them, and then I put a little note on here. And I'm going to read, should I just read the note? So you'll notice that in this little pipe there's a cork. Okay, and on the cork there's glued a little piece of paper. And this little piece of paper says, this item is sold as a non-functional artistic representation of a contemporary tobacco pipe. The bearer warrants being at least 18 years of age. Under penalty of law, removal of this tag is prohibited excepting by its lawful owner. Neither Parramore Glass Incorporated nor any of its functionaries assumes any responsibility, risk, or liability resulting from any use of this item. So what I've done is I've made this simple little functional piece an absolute work of art because it's non-functional. Now, if one is to remove the cork, then all bets are off. So what I've done is taken a functional piece, I've defined it by making it non-functional, and put a little thing on here that says this is a piece of art, and it's signed and numbered. So this is kind of one of my things in trying to not necessarily jump in whole hog to the pipe world, but it's a way of sort of getting people to realize, hold on a minute, you know, why don't we look at some of the fundamental questions here that will help the pipe world become recognized as a legitimate art form without running into so much difficulty. And so there are many, many simple solutions to this type of an equation. You know, so something as simple as a cork, which makes it non-functional, a little piece of paper that says this is a piece of art, and it's non-functional. So this has just been my take on it. This is my little quirk, and this is something that I'm doing, you know, that's going to continue on. So again, I've never really had a problem with the pipe market. It's been, how do I take my 41 years of experience, my 41 years of reputation in all aspects of lampworking, whether it's teaching at Pilchuck, or teaching at Osaka University in Japan, or teaching in India, you know, all of this sort of stuff. How do I balance? Nice. We just had some sort of phone going off here, you know. Nice. You know, I probably should turn mine off too. But anyway, so the way that I had to sort of engineer, so to speak, a way to come into the pipe world to make sure that everyone knows what I'm doing is art, and there is no question, there is no debate. You know, if I put a piece on the table with this little cork and a note in it that makes it non-functional, there's no debate. The only thing that makes it functional is if you take the cork out. Now that's your choice. If you want to take a piece of art and destroy it, then that's your business. However, if you want it to simply be a piece of art, you leave the cork in, you never use it, and there you have it. So there's just little simple ways where you can tweak people's imagination. And so all I'm saying is, in my sense, this is what Parramore did to try to bridge that gap, you know, and to not make a functional piece. You know, it's a functional form, but it's not really a functional piece. So a long answer, I mean really a short answer ultimately to a longer question, but it takes a little bit of development to really understand what something so simple as a little handpiece with a cork in it means. Yeah, so the idea was it was a funny kind of a thing, you know, and a friend of mine was in kind of a bind, and you know, needed some money, and I said, well, I'm an artist, you know, I'm really not a pipe maker. But at the same time, I identified you as the owner of number 11, Tracy. I hope you don't mind. So anyway, it was one of those things where I said, okay, man, you know, how about if I help you put together some money, and you know, you're in a tight situation. I know that if I make some pipes, some non-functional artwork, that I can help you out. So anyway, the number 1 through 13, the very first, or actually it's 00 through 13. Came about for me just saying I need to help somebody out. I need to help out a friend of mine, which is a private thing, and I'm not going to explain what all that's about. But anyway, so what I did was I let it be known to a few people, basically at the bar one night, that hey, I'm going to make a few pieces. Can you guys help me out? And literally people, they didn't even ask questions. It wasn't, when are you making them here? You know, it was just, yeah, let's you know, here you go. So instead of just getting, you know, paying some money and getting a piece, it's like, how can I, again, back to how can I make this quirky enough to where no matter what, everybody knows that I have come up with a new angle on all of this. So 1 through 13 is were sold before I made them. You know, it was just like that. So I'm probably going to continue on with it. I think it's a good idea, and I like the concept, and I like being able to dabble in that part of the industry, but still at the same time maintain the absolute control over whether it's a piece of art or whether it's a piece of craft. And now you can debate that all you want to, but it's a non-functional thing, so it must be art, and it has a signature, and it has a number. So it's that simple. You know, simple solution to a difficult problem.